In 2020, there were 3.8 million Muslims in the United States. And in the UK, 5,000 to 6,000 people convert to Islam every single year. This is Quews News, UK Now, and I am Curtis Hinton. Today, I'm joined by Khalil Mitchell. Hello and welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
The reason why you're on the show is because you are an Islam convert.
Muslim convert.
Muslim convert.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, we typically call people who become Muslim new Muslims, but I've actually been Muslim for around 25 years now, so I don't know if that's the right terminology.
If you're still a new... You converted in 2001?
Yes.
So your story, you converted 6 days before 9/11.
With an interesting timing, I happened to be in Damascus. I went to Damascus with an interest in finding out more about Islam with the man who was introducing me to Islam. And we felt that was a worthy place to go. Obviously, we were there for about 2 weeks, and then I became Muslim, which was a kind of gradual process. And again, I've been learning about it prior to going to Syria, prior to going to Damascus. But lo and behold, around 6 days after I became Muslim, after I said Shahada, we visited Aleppo. And the day we arrived in Aleppo, the World Trade Centers were under attack. And of course, it was horrifying. It was a complete shock for us. And everyone was shocked. Or the Muslims were shocked, and the non-Muslims were shocked. It was a very unusual time, you could say.
So you were in your mid-20s when you decided to convert?
Yeah, around that.
Before that, let's just run us through, what was your life like before that? Were you interested in religion? Was there any other religion you were aligned to?
Right, when I was younger, I was raised as a Christian. So Christianity kindled a belief in something bigger, a belief in God. The dynamics of the creed of Christianity in terms of the Trinity, we were not taught properly. And again, we just had this understanding of a bigger thing that was kind of beyond definition. We weren't told what the bigger thing was. And this is a very important thing for me to have been raised with. I understood typically by default that God was a bigger thing that had power over all things. It was no power attributed to Jesus or to others who claimed a divine spirit or anything like that. We weren't told that type of thing. So I always credit that as being kind of foundational stone in terms of me comprehending God, as it were, rather than being an atheist.
Yeah.
If I'd been raised an atheist, believing in energies or statues or trees, I might not have understood Islam when it came to me.
And how did it come to you? What was the initial, where was your first introduction to Islam? And roughly when did you start feeling it could be something more than just a religion in the world to you?
Okay, well, the initial introduction happened a long time before the second part of the question. I became aware of Muslims around me in Edinburgh, and I didn't really know they were Muslims. I knew they were Pakistanis. A great many of them had corner shops. There was one particular large shop in Portobello High Street, I think was called Cost Conscious, spelt with K-O-S-T, conscious, K-O-N, which kind of stood out, and it was run by a Muslim man. I didn't really have much interaction with Muslims, but nonetheless, I went to school with their children. There was, people popped up, and it was predominantly a white environment in Portobello in Edinburgh at that time. So, you become aware that people were around that were not from, a European white background.
Yeah.
I didn't speak to any of them about Islam, but they were there, and it was a kind of thing whereby I was kind of used to that. There was a girl called Halima in my primary school class, and she was interacting with everyone in the same kind of way that any other child would. But there was no talk about Islam. The introduction to Islam was initially through rap music.
Okay, wow.
Okay, so rap music fused with engagements with Pakistanis in Edinburgh who listened to rap music. And it went down to one crucial thing whereby I was in a shopping mall. It's called Waverley Mall. I think it's still there. I don't know what it's called now. And myself and my two school friends were all into the rap group Public Enemy. And we became aware that these guys were sitting down opposite. We'd probably, we'd all of us had seen them before.
Yeah.
Emblazoned with Public Enemy regalia. like badges and we were just like, well, that's the coolest thing ever. And it was me that plucked up enough courage to talk to them. And they, of course, were Muslim Pakistanis who liked Public Enemy. Public Enemy are not by any means a rap group that are flagging up Islam, other than Malcolm X, Malik el-Shabazz. They did talk about him. And, that's something I kind of became aware of later on. So I went up to these guys and said, are you guys into PE? PE, Public Enemy. And we got talking, and then, it's just like we were breaking out of our comfort zone, talking to people we didn't know, which wasn't normal in Edinburgh in the 90s. People were kind of scared to speak to each other they didn't know. It took a lot for me to do it. And then, of course, once the ice was broken, we became friends. So that was kind of like the initial thing. Over a period of years, I'd meet other Pakistani Muslims, which would kind of culminate in me meeting one who I spent a lot of time with, and actually was invited round to his house. And over a period of several years, he talked to me about Islam.
Would he be preaching it, or would it just be in passing and you're asking a question and it reverted back to Islam because that's what was the source of the conversation?
It came up from time to time, but when it did, it was of a forceful kind of form in terms of, he'd ask me, he'd talk about Islam, and I'd come up with my typical thing, I believe in something bigger, but I don't follow religion.
Okay.
But he was quite firm with me. He said, well, what do you know? And that kind of like shook me up.
Yeah.
And what do you actually know about these things? So then he told me things like the hadith, scriptures, descriptions of the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he said that there's many instances where he spoke about things that to do with the future, and he gave me a few examples, and basically that stood out. I was like, okay, so this is something interesting. So the very first time I ever had an inkling of anything to do with Islam was somebody telling me things of somebody prophesizing the future. And a man that lived 1,400 years ago, who was prophesizing the future, speaking about things in a manner that, actually concurs with what happened loosely.
I want to talk about what your family and friends thought of when you became a Muslim. 2001, obviously, very controversial time for Islam. People blaming a religion for the attacks in America, in New York. When you told your family and friends you were converting to Islam, what were their responses?
Well, I told them after I became Muslim.
Okay, so they had no idea before?
No idea.
Wow.
I had started praying before I went to Damascus. And
they didn't know that was happening?
No.
Okay.
Well, nobody did. I just knew I needed to pray.
Why?
I had this inclination to pray.
Why do you think you didn't tell them? Or was it not you were hiding it? Was it more just it wasn't their
It was
business?
immensely, one's relationship with one's Lord when it's being formed is an immensely subtle thing. It has to be something that's kindled inside oneself, and it's met with, you're turning to something bigger in this sea of the self.
Yeah.
The sea of all these emotions and feelings and desires and memories and expectations, and how do you navigate?
It's a personal journey.
Connecting with God. So the journey hadn't yet begun, the Shahada hadn't yet happened. But I was living with a Muslim for a year and a half, asked him many questions, and it was quite clear to me that the bigger thing existed, that Allah existed. And he, over many months, said to me, call this thing Allah. It's God. You understand the word God, but the last revealed prophet, alayhi salatu salam, said the name of this being is Allah, and it's simply to do with the Arabic language. So I made these kinds of adjustments, and I said, can I say Allah a lot? And he said, yeah, say Allah all the time. So I'd be going to make a cup of coffee in the kitchen, and I'd start saying Allah, 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 as I was doing it. And my friends were waiting in the front room. It wasn't going to be any conversations about Islam with my friends.
Yeah.
But basically, it was a build up to this thing. And as I mentioned, I started praying. Now, the event on the day that I started praying was that I knew I didn't need anything else. I didn't need alcohol. I didn't need the other things that I did. I walked in the direction of the place where I was staying and it was actually a friend's house. In the run-up to us going to Damascus, we stayed in different houses. because he was my flatmate. But anyway, we're staying in this place, and I needed to pray. It came to me that I needed to pray, and I understood the Muslims prayed towards Mecca, and I worked out roughly where Mecca was, and I looked around the room in the house I was staying, and the chap I was staying was actually an antiques dealer. So he had all his paraphernalia everywhere of all these things that he was selling, and all these shells, and I thought, there must be a compass somewhere. So I looked around and I found two. So I set the thing up and faced it from what I understand was the direction of Mecca, which was roughly correct, and just put a tile down on the floor and said Allahu Akbar, and didn't know. I mean, I knew Muslims were clean, so I did it after having a shower, so I didn't know how to make the ablution. And I just started doing this, and this became something I did once a day. It was a kind of thing whereby I knew I needed to do it, and it was my prayer that I was doing and my recognition of this thing.
Was you ever told how to do this? In terms of, were you ever told things to say, things to think, or would you just be in the moment and whatever comes to your mind, whatever comes to your prayer?
A very good question. It led to me telling the chap who I had been living with, who I was going to go to Damascus with, that I'd started praying. And he said to me, well, we didn't say congratulations, didn't say well done. And it wasn't like a patting on the back. It was a very subtle way, in a very, weighty way he dealt with it. And he basically said, okay, well, you need to learn the prayer. And I was like, okay. And he got a sort of A4 piece of printer paper from the coffee shop we were sitting in, that's probably what they had, and just proceeded to write down, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, Ar-Rahmanir Rahim, Maliki Yawmiddin, Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'in. Ihdina sirat al-mustaqim, sirat al-ladina an'amta alayhim, ghayril maghdubi alayhim, waladdallin. Ameen. In transliteration. Of course, it's not in Arabic.
Yeah.
You pronounce it in Arabic. And he said, look, reading the prayer in Arabic has a weight and a validity. And, with this particular thing, you need to read it in Arabic. So I then had this prayer, the sheet that traveled with me for several weeks. And the whole prayer was transliterated. And of course, that took me to Damascus and back again to Edinburgh. And I was reading on that. And I memorized the prayer from that to read it in Arabic. So I started doing it once a day. When I arrived in Damascus with him, he said, well, you best do what the people here do. And the people here pray 5 times a day. So I took it upon myself to join in to do the 5 prayers.
For those who don't know why do you pray 5 times a day?
The answer is why we do it is that it was revealed through Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, peace and blessings be upon him. It was revealed through him that it's the minimum amount that man needs to pray to connect with the source. When you turn to Allah, when you turn to God, you're connecting with the source of the entire universe, all existence, the thing that holds every molecule in place. All the orbits of every planet and every star are held in place by this thing. So this is cutting through. And again, it's something you cannot discover by oneself. You have to discover it through an authentic transmission from a prophet that these things have been revealed to. Prophets of God are human beings with divinely revealed knowledge. And the last one happens to be Muhammad. Everything Jesus said was correct, but of course it was fragmented and changed after. Everything Moses said was correct, but again it was fragmented and changed after. So the event of the final messenger, it was the last and latest, and very much forms part of the era that we're living in now. And he instructed mankind to pray 5 times a day. That's why we do it. But most Muslims actually pray a lot more. I mean, there's extra prayers that Muslims do. And this is we taste something in doing it.
So what I want to know is, you've touched upon how strict essentially the religion is in terms of 5 times a day. For someone who wasn't praying before, fitting in 5 prayers a day, someone may go, how do I do that? So how do you find your life change in terms of fitting in and being, not religious, but being rigid with your discipline to make sure you followed the religion so in the respectful way?
The first thing to understand is when one embraces Islam, the main reality or the main practice, you could say the reality of the practice, are the prayers.
Okay.
The prayers are the thing that people, as you say, might have to kind of adjust themselves to doing. With me, again, with the unusual circumstance where I'd started praying prior to becoming Muslim, by the time I actually said the Shahada, I actually knew it. Now, that's not the normative way people approach. Usually they become Muslim and then they learn the prayer after. It's the thing that many Muslims lack in emphasizing to people who are on the way to Islam, is the seismic shift in daily activity from the realm of turning away from having any kind of responsible thing that you do every day to this huge responsibility to plug in and to turn to Allah 5 times a day through the salat, through the prayer. And it needs to be emphasized a lot for anyone approaching Islam. With me, it was instilled from the start. The man who introduced me to Islam prayed 5 times a day, planned his day around the prayers.
And how does that happen in a working life? If someone's watching this interview with you and they're thinking, my boss isn't allowing that, I can't do 5 times a day. What do you say to them? How do you speak to them?
Well, again, how these things are dealt with as emphasized and explained through fiqh. The fiqh is the jurisprudence, what you do and what you don't do, how you deal with things. So there's a kind of science within Islam that explains these things. So the way I've had it explained to me is that you try to do it. You ask your boss, excuse me, John, I'm Muslim, can I go and pray? Now, in this day and age, with this kind of like liberalism, as it were, or this the need to accept people of religion, and I don't want to make it look like I'm not letting, most people I know have had to ask these types of questions, are given a place to pray and told they're allowed to go upstairs to do it.
They have prayer rooms. Absolutely, yeah. Majority of the big corporations nowadays will have a prayer room.
Do they?
In their
amazing. Yeah. Well, I mean, most people end up in some sort of, I don't know, cupboard somewhere. I don't know. There's lots of different examples. Yeah. At the time, I wasn't working a 9-to-5 type thing, so I didn't have to make that adjustment. But again, if the boss says no, Allah knows you have made the effort to try and do it. Yeah. You tried to do it, so you make it up when you get home.
And with other elements of your life, so if you've touched on alcohol.
Yeah.
There are strict things within the Islam community that you can't do. Did that affect your life majorly, or?
Well, the thing to understand is that many people prop their lives up on these types of intoxicants, these hedonistic engagements, this reveling in going out of oneself into another thing of just, becoming legless or headless or, whatever you want. Many people are very much hinged to that, and I was one of those people. These things are propped up as a kind of sedatives of dealing with the modern world that help us deal with the world. This idea you can get away to the pub and take a few of these drinks and then you're kind of sedated. It's appealing and it becomes part of people's lifestyle. These types of things, I didn't realize it at the time, but they were really the things holding me back. But the emphasis was not on giving the things up. The emphasis is on what you do in replacing these things.
And what did you replace them with?
Well, again, the prayer is the thing that the Muslims hold above everything else. Yeah. And then what we do in between the prayers. With the prayers themselves, you often don't feel anything when you do them, but you feel something in the time following. Or rather, the time following in between, let's say the early afternoon prayer and the mid-afternoon prayer, is going to have a different tonality and a different quality. And, for anyone embarking upon the prayer and getting into the prayer, it's important to know that they might not feel it within the 5 to 10 minute bracket of doing the prayer itself. But in some respects, there's more of a chance of you feeling something after. The thing I had to gear myself away from was this idea of getting high or intoxicated from the prayer.
Yeah.
It wasn't something that happened, it can happen occasionally where you feel something. But mankind now deals with the world based on feelings, emotions, and stimulus from the world and response to the stimulus and intoxication and the feelings that come from these things. We build our lives based on this emotional response. So again, the meaning of the prayer is so vast, it cannot be pinned down and to say that you feel high when you do the prayer or you feel of a certain way. Lots of things don't really. The thing that I was told that was very useful is that the prayers that you don't feel like doing, you don't feel spiritual, and you go ahead and do it, they're the prayers that have more weight. But the weight that these prayers have might not be revealed to us in this life. It's something that holds up and is revealed, of course, after we die. Everything is counterbalanced with this occurrence of what happens after we die. And that's why we pray.
I'm going to use the term Islamophobia.
Yeah.
Mid-20s Caucasian male converts to Islam. Did you experience that when you came back to the UK?
Well, typically people that experience Islamophobia are people that don't look like me in one form or the other. And that's something that has to be understood. Any type of discrimination is generally faced by people that are not of a white European background like myself. With people who I informed, who I became Muslim, it actually intrigued them. They're like, you know, some people, 80% of people were intrigued from a positive point of view. I was like, why? Why did you become Muslim?
Did you ever think, could you stop asking me why? And just try it in such a confused manner, but almost kind of what it means to you in terms of, did you want people to approach you with a more of a, tell me why, rather than, why have you done that?
It was a mixture of both.
Yeah.
Mostly the latter didn't really come into it. There was very few people that kind of questioned it from a point of view of thinking they understood what it was about.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I've heard of a few instances where people actually say to us, like, Muslim? Why would you become Muslim? You know, I mean, that kind of response does happen to people like myself. It's not that it's all, you know, intrigue.
Yeah.
But people looked at me, they realized I was, you know, sane to a degree, able to communicate something. And, you know, it was actually a sense of, you know, many people, probably over half the people that I tell I'm Muslim, that they ask me, well, how did you end up becoming Muslim? And I try to tell as many people as possible. I realize there's two ways of telling somebody. Those who you're going to see regularly, let's say in the workplace, I believe that the behavior of the Muslim is a thing that will enable them to see a kind of credibility to who we might be. And I don't necessarily say that I'm Muslim to those who I'm going to see regularly. But more often than not, it's a fleeting engagement. It's the guy you start talking to in the queue. It's the person who serves you in the coffee shop.
Yeah.
And that's when you flag these things up and you can get very interesting responses. One time I've actually had somebody saying, well, I've been looking at Islam and I want to become Muslim. You see, so I don't look like a Muslim. I'm not dressed in a jalaba. I don't wear an Arab turban. So, you know, telling people I'm Muslim is my kind of way of doing that. And I don't hesitate, even if the person looks crazy.
I was going to say, because when you said it right, in terms of you do not look like what you would describe someone to be a Muslim.
Yeah.
In the world, not the Western world necessarily. Sure. So you won't be facing that day-to-day issues that Muslims, even in 2024, still face today. Now, there is a reason, a bigger reason why we've got you on the show today, and that's because of the elections in America took place, and the Muslim community, somewhat surprisingly, played a huge advantage to Trump winning the campaign.
In particular states, really the swing states, as you viewers are probably aware, if we watch this clip, it gives a very good indication of what the Republicans highlighted in regards to utilizing Muslims actually at Trump rallies. It's quite an interesting clip.
We're going to give that a little watch now.
So, as you can see, there's a seismic shift. And again, one cannot become intoxicated with this idea of, oh, Donald Trump supports Muslims. He's not interested in Muslims, really.
Yeah.
It's obviously to get votes. But it's him, he and his advisors, or rather, probably entirely his advisors, have said the climate is such that you can actually bring Muslims into a Republican Trump event and have them speaking on stage, and it will not turn people against Trump who are in the established voting bloc.
Yeah.
This is what's interesting. If you look back to 2016, 2017, when it was Trump-Clinton, the idea that Trump would have Muslims on stage at a convention was unfathomable. It was simply something that would not happen. People identified Trump as being anti-Muslim. They identified him as being somebody who was continuing the Republican war on Muslims from a point of view of claiming that these people are our enemy. They're trying to declare jihad against us. So, you know, the fact there's been a type of change, and it's not that all the Republicans, certainly the people campaigning with Trump, it's not that they're all pro-Muslim, or it's not that they understand Islam. But the mere fact that he was advised to get a group of Muslims on stage, obviously to get votes, means that there's a type of change occurring from a point of view of the right wing or the Republican base, the Republican bloc, which is typically identified as being anti-Islam, to some degree can be coerced or it can be guided to accept Muslims if they support Trump.
Yeah.
And of course, this is a criteria. So there's a type of change occurring that's very interesting. And it's not from a point of view of the Republicans becoming Muslim. It's not. That's not what's happening.
I mean, Muslims were traditionally more Democrat, especially because of the way the Republican Party are.
100%.
Biden got 65 to 70% of the Muslim vote back in 2020. Kamala got 50%, around about 50% they're estimated at the moment of the Muslim community this time round. Key states, as you say, Arab and Muslim communities in Michigan, put it down to the fact of how they've handled the situation in Gaza and with Israel as to why Kamala has been affected. Is that something you can align with, or something you can see as the fact that they've failed to help the Palestinian Gazan people?
Well, they certainly felt disenfranchised with the way that the Biden administration has failed to, in any way, curtail the slaughter engaged in by Israel. And, that's quite prevalent. And, certainly the events of the last year, it's safe to say that a kind of magnifying glass has been brought up for us to see the influence that this relatively small country bang in the middle of the Middle East has on major Western governments, to the point where, for several months, they couldn't even advocate a ceasefire.
Yeah.
The Muslims, in many ways, wanted to punish Biden and wanted to punish the Democrats. It felt, and again, it's a kind of ressentiment, like a reactionary type of resentment of the Democrats, which was then used by the Trump administration. And again, this is not that the Trump administration liked Muslims per se. It's not that. It was probably hundreds of thousands of Muslims that could potentially be guided to vote for Trump if Trump acknowledged them and put a hand out to them, which in effect he did. It's all for votes.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? It's not that the Republicans are sort of going to be influenced by Islam in any way, and we don't get carried away by these things.
Well, in the video we watch, we see Trump say that Muslims could change the vote in the US.
It's quite honest.
And giving them the feeling that they've got that power almost as well means that more Muslims are going to get up and vote.
He was really to those at the convention who were his traditional voting base to say, look, we need these guys.
Yeah.
It's really to them, I think. And this funny bit where he says, these guys are not terrorists. Just like, it's like he's educating children.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? So it's kind of, funny in some respects how that happened. But again, these things have a ramification by Allah. Because again, we understand Allah has power over all things. If it heralds a type of, small acceptance of Muslims from within the what you could say, the right field, the right-wing kind of groupings in America, then who knows where that could lead to? Again, it's not that it's going to create this massive opening.
Well, I'll show you the significant difference. I'll tell you the significant difference, in fact. So, Michigan, the key Arab and Muslim communities like Dearborn and Hamtramck, they had a huge shift. Trump increased his vote in Dearborn from 30 to 32%, but more so in Hamtramck from 13 to 43% from 2016.
Amongst Muslims? Amongst
Muslim communities, yeah. They're the ones with the largest, obviously that's the area share percent increase, but they are with the largest Arab and Muslim communities.
You see, it worked, and there's no doubt about that. From a point of view of using Muslims to get votes.
If that was in the UK, we'll discuss UK politics shortly, but if that was in the UK, do you think that, could you trust Trump to keep the promise of what he's saying to Muslim voters?
Okay, so if Trump were in the UK,
and saying the exact same things as he's saying, if you were an American citizen, could you trust Trump?
It's something that I always feel the Tories and the right wing missed out on, was the fact that you could use this thing.
Yeah.
And again, this is not about, we don't need the right wing or the left wing to justify our position. It's very important to understand that. Islam is not affiliated to the core of what this right wing or left wing ideology is. In terms of elements within right-wing understandings and elements within left-wing understandings, of course, because they're all political generally, and Islam has a political understanding, but we do not go towards one or the other.
Yeah.
So again, traditionally in the UK, the Muslims have been affiliated with Labour. Labour have very much used this "we accept everyone" thing, and one calls that woke nowadays, or this liberal. But liberal has a different meaning in the UK than it does in America. So you've got this kind of thing whereby that's been used a long time by left-wing understanding, left-wing people who follow that type of thing. Again, if the right-wing groupings of people in the UK, the parties, the people like Rishi Sunak and all these other people, I mean, they could have potentially done the same thing. Would I have trusted them? Well, it depends what they're promising.
Yeah.
So one of Trump's promises, again, trust is based on a prerequisite promise of a type of action. So the question you could ask me is, do you think Trump's going to stop?
Do you think he's going to stop the war?
Well,
that's the key. That's one of the key points, right? At the moment with Israel and the Middle East, do you think he can stop? He went there before with the Abraham Accords deal. He managed to bring peace to the Middle East, as he called it. Do you think he can do that again and ultimately save lives? Just forget the fact of the financial cost. There's a human cost at stake here on both sides.
What you tend to find is governments initiating an acts of war use particular political terrains to get away with certain things when they can.
Yeah.
I have no idea what Israel will decide to do, because in many respects, it's quite clear they're pulling certain strings.
Well, Benjamin Netanyahu was very happy that Trump won, so he felt that was a positive to him. But Muslim voters in the US may have voted him because they thought he was going to stop the war.
Again, unwavering support for Israel entails a type of indication that he's going to let them do what they want.
Yeah.
Do you see? At the same time, telling Muslims that he's going to force people to the table of peace. I really don't know. I think it will be a bit of both.
He's now experienced. He's had 4 years in office, so he's not going to go in like the TV star he was back in 2016. He's going in as a politician, because that's what he is now. A former president, an impending president. He's not going in with no knowledge. So do you have more confidence in him now than you did or would have had in 2016, saying these terms?
What was demonstrative through Trump's first term was that it's very clear, it still is now, that there are different power groupings. And the Israeli lobby are one. The military are another. The financial aspects, well, there's different sides of the financial groupings are one another. The oil guys and the commodities guys, again, it's not just one block, but there's different things.
Yeah.
Trump obviously seemed to make deals in the 2017 25th presidential election, that he would give them certain things. So if you look back, you might remember that Israel were given a kind of credibility and credence because the American embassy was moved to Jerusalem. The military were given a kind of, you could say, I wouldn't say carte blanche approach to drone strikes, but Trump indicated that targeted assassinations through drone were not going to be kept and monitored in the same way. The financial people were given a certain thing, and so there were different groups given different things. Now, what happened towards the end of his administration is it's clear that with several of those groupings that he initially kind of placated and gave them, what they wanted, turned against them to some degree. So there's lots of generals, for example, when he talked about withdrawing the troops from northern Syria, many generals were is this guy crazy? Because the general way these things work is that once America get a piece of land militarily, that's then used and kept for indefinitely. The bases are there. I think he said he was going to withdraw all the troops from northern Syria. In the end, he didn't withdraw them all. He withdrew several dozens of thousands. But again, that was something that infuriated the generals, the military bloc, because that's the ideology behind that, of taking land and keeping it. Israel were, I think, to some extent infuriated by his dismissal of John Bolton, who is quite obviously a staunch advocate of Israel. And, I think that was something there. And then, of course, the debacle happened where he was advised to assassinate Qasem Soleimani. That happened quite quickly after John Bolton's removal. Yeah. So, I don't know. I don't quite know what that means. It's quite clear that somebody made the suggestion, and it was worded in a way that did not indicate the full impetus behind what that would lead to.
Yeah.
It was like somebody on the terror watch list.
It's making a decision without all the information potentially. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, do you see? So there's certain things that happened that were his kind of pushing forward with things that upset people to some degree.
Yeah.
He didn't rock the boat to a degree where the boat would capsize. But certain things he did towards the end of his administration.
He'd almost pull something out to see how it'd react and put it back in if it needed to be put back, or suggest something without it fully going ahead.
It's fairly well known now. After Soleimani was assassinated, Trump quite quickly realized the impetus of what was going on and quite quickly called up the Iranians and said, look, I didn't mean to do that.
Yeah.
We're going to give you, we're going to give you a way in which you can save face. And, it's fairly well known. It's been corroborated by another friend who's a journalist. Is he gave them the base to bomb. I think it was in Iraq. And withdraw the American soldiers out. And, of course, the Iranians filmed the entire thing, bombing up an American base. And, of course, the people were kind of satisfied to some degree that revenge had been taken.
Yeah.
And he did that to defuse the situation. Then Trump did that to defuse the situation.
I don't know if you've seen recently, I think, as today in the news, Iran the FBI have confirmed that Iran had planned to assassinate Donald Trump during the election campaign. They had made plans.
Yeah, I honestly don't know. The indication.
Does it make the next 4 years, if that's true, and obviously Trump gets it, does it make the next 4 years talks with Iran, if they ever were to take place, even tougher?
I would say the best way of understanding it is within any given nation state or within any power block of people, because of course power lies beyond government nowadays, many extents. It's going to be, you cannot say it's going to be one or the other. It's going to be different things that will happen at different times. It's not going to be a black and white support or no support. I'm quite sure that, if Trump is seen as, in some ways, giving lip service to the idea of ending the war against the Gazan people, that, Iran will kind of be given a type of credibility from that, even if it doesn't happen. Even the fact he'll talk that up. Do you see? So I don't know what the story is in regards to.
I want to move on to UK politics.
Okay.
We had our elections earlier this year. Labour won, but Labour did receive a less vote than normal from the Muslim community. Why do you think that was?
Okay, well, you have to look at the dynamics of in the run-up to the election. I think there'd been about 8 months of bombing of Gaza, maybe slightly more. And it was quite clear that the leader of the opposition at the time, who was Keir Starmer, was absolutely against any mention of ceasefires being initiated within the first few months. And then, of course, was kind of forced to accept that there should be a ceasefire.
Yeah.
And it was quite clear to many Muslims that this man had no interest in supporting the weight, or supporting those who are being annihilated by this response to what happened on October the 6th, which of course is part of an ongoing campaign to interfere in that area, which is Gaza. So that was demonstrated quite clearly by Keir Starmer, and people understood, Muslims understood, that this man does not have any interest in Muslims or stopping Muslims from being killed.
So from an outside perspective, someone who isn't Muslim, he wasn't helping a country, a civilization, potentially stop a war.
Yeah.
As a Muslim, do you see that as he's not helping Muslims, or he's not helping the country?
There's lots of reasons why people in power do things that they do. It's not easy to generalize.
Yeah.
It's not when they give a type of permission, you could say, for certain groupings of people to be killed. One cannot always attribute it to being to do with religion. it can't always be attributed to that. More often than not, it's to do with money.
Yeah.
And there's a whole thing there with Gaza and the significance of that area geopolitically, in terms of it being an area of strategic interest. Many Muslims do feel that people like Keir Starmer, whoever gives a green light to Israel, are trying to kill Muslims, and the agenda is to kill Muslims, and or to raise Israel up to the point where it, all the things that are in some ways spoken about in terms of what they want to do actually happen. There's different reasons, there's different levels of understanding and emotion attached to Muslim groups. I wouldn't like to say it's one thing.
I'd like to ask you the question of, what are your thoughts on the attacks on Jewish people around the world? From the colleges in America where they're refusing to allow Jewish people in, the students, to the recent football fan attacks on the Jewish team that was traveling in Holland and Amsterdam. What are your thoughts on that? Because Islam is a peaceful religion. When at the heart of it, it's peaceful. Now it's Muslims versus the Jewish people. What's your thoughts on these attacks that are taking place on Jewish people around the world?
The question would be what do you think my response would be to that?
From understanding the religion, I'd say you'd be against it.
Well, that's your answer. We
So
don't endorse any types of attacks on particular religious groups.
So those who are doing it, who claim to be part of Islam, what's not your message to them, but what would you try and say to them?
I've no idea who these people are. Being part of Islam, they're not following Islam by engaging in a type of act against any individual who's representing something that somebody deems as an enemy. It's not permissible.
Yeah.
You can't do it. So I don't have any message to them. I don't know who they are. I don't think they'd listen to me anyway. More often than not, of course, within all religions, there are extreme groups.
Yeah.
There's extremist Jews. There's extremist Christians, and there's extremist Muslims. Or rather, there's extremists who claim to be Jewish. There's extremists who claim to be Christian, and there's extremists who claim to be Muslim. And all of these things have to be understood as being part of, in essence, a deviation, a breakaway from the core creed of each of those different, what you could call religions.
Yeah.
We don't call Islam a religion, it's a deen, it's a path. But again, there's lots of things that Muslims can misinterpret, or rather political leaders can misinterpret from Islam, in the same way political leaders have misinterpreted Christianity, and to lead individuals to engaging in acts of violence that are impermissible.
And is that people exploiting the religions for their own good?
With the First Crusade, Pope Urban had to categorize the Muslims as being animals to get these good Christian people to go and engage in war against them. Because the Christians jumped up at the time of the First Crusade, before the First Crusade, and they said, well, we can't kill other humans. The Bible's against killing other humans. And then, of course, that was basically, actually the Muslims are not human. So this has been going on a long time, and obviously, I think the point you're making is that in this era, those who misinterpret Islamic texts are given a type of prominence and attention. Anders Breivik proclaimed himself, from what I understand, to be a Christian. Obviously it's not. The acts he engaged in were not under the thing of Christianity.
So why do you think the media are covering? Because like you say, every religion has these extremists, has these extreme people who are taking the religion as their defense, if you like. Why do you think the media focus on Muslims more than any other religion?
Well, there's different sides of the answer. Rather, there's different answers to cover different sides. The general norm in terms of the way the world is heading towards runs contrary to Islamic teachings. You could say economically.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you want to look at, if you believe that there is a broader, general kind of painting, a type of depiction of Muslims, generally worldwide by the media, well, you could say that there's an agenda behind that. I would say many people believe that there is. And why does the agenda exist? So it was when you understand that in the 50s, a group of the top finance houses, conglomerates, governments, and media got together and understood that they had formed a certain thing. And they said the only threat to this thing is a revived version of Islam where the Muslims initiate correct transactions, economic transactions, using gold and silver. So this is known to have happened. And the need for Muslims to, in effect, propagate things that go beyond the modern system, not from a point of view of knocking things down. We don't point to things that need to be destroyed, or we think need to be destroyed, or other people need to be destroyed. The way forward is not destroying these things. The way forward is calling to Islam, calling to the permissible trade and usage of halal currencies, and you point to Islam. If we believe in Islam, we should point to Islam as a type of credible, or rather the only solution for everything that's happening. And again, you might say, well, you're going to go out in the street and start shouting at people that they need to become. It's not how it works. We understand Islam as is the solution, as a religion. Is the solution individually to people's needs to worship something bigger, and a requirement, not so much a solution, but it's a requirement for people to find something bigger. We don't have long living in this life. And we understand as Muslims, and we believe as Muslims 100% the only way, really, or the highest of ways that can be done is through Islam. But also socially, in a civic setting, societally, that we believe the laws within Islam, when they're understood correctly and applied correctly, lead to a type of civic harmony that would counter a lot of the problems that are going on.
Regardless of all the media narrative, as I said at the top of the show, 3.8 million Muslims in the US. That represents 1.1% of the population in the United States. Mosques have grown to 2,769 up to 2020, which was double the amount than a decade prior. Converts to Islam, up 23% of Muslim adults are converts, with many coming in from Christian backgrounds. The UK, 5,000 to 6,000 people a year are converting to Islam annually. And the last few years, the conversions in both the US and UK have seemed to be substantially influenced by social crises, such as the Islamic Hamas. They're aligning themselves with the religion. Is that, in your opinion, is that what you're feeling within your communities? Do you feel that people are turning to you rather than away from you?
There's multiple reasons why people will empathize with the Muslims, and multiple reasons why people might become Muslim. There's infinite reasons why somebody can become Muslim. They can look at any aspect of the world and realize it's not satiating their heart, whatever that might be, and at any point that can be knocked down. The lockdowns with the seductive kind of breastfeeding that the world gives everyone, the dummy was removed. You see, you were told you're not allowed to do all these things. The things that people lent on to kind of distract themselves from themselves and their mortality, and what they might be searching for in the way of looking at the meaning of life. These things are the things that stop them from thinking these things are all taken away. So there's no doubt that this, and again, the stories of death and people dying and people facing their mortality, whatever the figures were in regards to these deaths actually being attributed to the COVID-19 virus, whatever they were, people were being hit with this thing, where things that they were ignoring all their lives and covering up through activities like going out with their mates or whatever it was, and they're told to sit alone at home. So it was a kind of, in Arabic, there's a type of thing, a seclusion, that one goes to God on a very high level of occurrence called a khalwa. It was a forced khalwa. It was like people were put into this thing. Lots of them weren't ready for that. But they asked, generally, increased people asking questions about what they're actually doing in their lives. And many people found different interests. They started getting into the gym instead of going to the pub. It's not that everyone started asking about Islam.
Religion
It's not
or anything
even
like that. Yeah,
it's not that everyone started asking about the meaning of life, but people with a dispensation for these types of questions, that were going to come up at some point, they came up then. Again, with Andrew Tate and Habib Nurmagomedov, there was an attention drawn to Islam. And what we've seen as a result of that are many younger men below the age of 30 showing an interest in Islam and becoming Muslim.
I wanted to touch upon the Andrew Tate effect on Islam.
Sure.
From the outside to certain people in the Western world, he is not what people would like their sons to grow up to be. That's not me saying that as my opinion. I'm just saying that as kind of a general view. He is Muslim, and he tells people that he's Muslim, and he preaches the Islam faith, the Muslim faith. He does it to try and get young boys or younger boys, men, who are finding a tough way of life now more than ever with, as we called it earlier, the woke world. Do you think that Islam could see a huge people conversion to it because of this woke world, and they have to try and find a discipline which they will abide by?
The interesting thing about the right wing being in some ways told to accept Muslims for the sake of voting in Donald Trump is interesting from the point of view of it claims to have values. And again, we understand Islam as being a value system. It's a series of values that are from the thing that created us. It's the reevaluation of all values. Again, that's an interesting thing within itself. Many people who identify with people, with Andrew Tate, would consider themselves, anti-woke, anti-liberal, anti-accepting everything.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a language within all that stuff. Ostensibly, the other groupings of people who are coming in might connect in a different kind of way, whereby they see, I don't know, Habib Nurmagomedov saying, don't praise me, praise Allah. There's different things that have happened in the last 5 years that have put Islam on the map in a different way. So the first thing to make clear is that there's probably no Muslim parents that would want their children, who are Muslim, to go anywhere near the types of understandings and rationale behind Andrew Tate. It's not so much, you cannot go into this thing of either be supporting Andrew Tate or being against him. The fact was, Allah used him and to highlight Islam. There's no denying that. When this man goes on television and speaks to literally hundreds of thousands of followers and continually talks about Islam, it's inconceivable that at least a few hundred, possibly more likely a few thousand of these people start asking, what is Islam? So it's simply a signpost. A signpost has no animated or automated it's just a sign to Islam. And a great many people I know who became Muslim, who initially were able to tell me that it was people like Habib Nurmagomedov and Andrew Tate that initially flagged up Islam. It's safe to say that a great many of them, with the period of months after they enter into Islam, have absolutely nothing to do with the lifestyle that Andrew Tate has often highlighted. They realise that he was just a kind of means.
A way to get there.
A means to get there.
Is he a good advocate for Muslims? The path to Islam?
Nobody's a good advocate to Islam in many respects. The archetype and the influencer of all Muslims is the messenger of Allah, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, is the Prophet Muhammad. He is the cornerstone of everything that we understand and what he did and what he didn't do. So when you become Muslim, you immediately click into this thing and face yourself in terms of things that you do not do, and you do not do, that you should do, and things that you do that you shouldn't do. You immediately become aware of all this. The entire thing is realigned over a period of months, to different degrees with different people, depending on how they want to follow that. So it's not that Andrew Tate is not a representation of somebody who stringently follows these things.
Yeah.
is quite clear. He really, a lot of the time, through his own blundering. It's stuff about the refugees, many of whom are Muslim.
Yeah.
His disparaging remarks against refugees obviously infuriated a lot of Muslims. So we've got to stop putting our hope in people like these Andrew Tate, and we can't expect anything from them. But we have to know that the hand of Allah, who is behind the occurrence of them, from a point of view of them raising Islam,
has done it for a reason.
Yeah, they can plan, but Allah is the greatest of planners. And there's no doubt that Islam has been given a kind of prevalence through influential people. 20 years ago, you were never going to hear about anyone. Who was before social media?
Yeah.
Before these influencers on YouTube, the famous people were Hollywood actors. And when were any of them going to sacrifice and put their heads in a guillotine by saying they become Muslim? Many of them probably did, but they weren't going to kind of like cut their ties with the means that feeds them through these huge, predominantly, whatever Hollywood influenced platforms. But why would they? They're not going to talk about things that they know are going to result in them losing favor with them
and support from fans potentially.
Exactly. So
it leads me perfectly onto my final question.
Sure.
And that is, where do you believe, following the UK, the US elections, the involvement, the power the Muslim communities have around the world, where do you believe Muslims and Islam goes forward in the Western world? What does that look like?
There's a few things that kind of pop up every now and then. Something I mentioned in the last interview is that it's widely accepted that the UK Muslims are in terms of Muslims who are living in a Western terrain, are perceived as some of the strongest in any Western country. And you can look at that by, if you think about the Muslims in Canada, the Muslims in America, the Muslims in Italy, France, Germany, you can see that there's a kind of dynamic that they have whereby they're not necessarily as strong in Islam. Now, this is not a generalization. You cannot say all the Muslims in Germany are being affiliated from a Turkish background, affiliated with nation state, secular state ideology, and because of Turkey. You can't, a lot of them have, but a lot of them haven't. You can say that in France, generally the Algerian, predominantly Algerian population, most of the Muslims in France are from an Algerian background. You can say they have been persecuted and ghettoized and debased by, as a political agenda. That has happened. But you cannot say that they're all weak in their Islam.
Yeah.
Because Allah tests who Allah wills. And wherever we go for as Muslims, with whatever form of persecution we face, we turn to Allah. And we understand Allah has power over all things. And the tests that we encounter, we are at an advantage if we take ourselves to turning to Allah in those situations. We are at an advantage. It's not easy to do when you're facing war, famine, and persecution, economic usurpation of your wealth. It's not easy to take these things to Allah, but this is what we have the potential to do. And it might take somebody several weeks or longer in a very testing situation before their iman, their faith goes up. But that's what all these things are for. So again, sorry to go off on a tangent. In terms of the future of Islam, I've no idea. I have absolutely no idea. It's such a huge thing. It's multi-varied different groupings and people and understandings and connectivity. And all I know is that in Norwich, where I am, we've been very blessed with some very credible people becoming Muslim. Predominantly men in the last 5 years, but a great many very articulate and strong women in the way that they are strong as women, and the men are strong in the way that they are as men, in different tones, different qualities, in different ways. We've been blessed with that, and all I can say is that from that point of view, I'm very optimistic. And with whatever happens, the enemies of Allah can plan, but Allah is the greatest of planners. They can plan, but Allah is the greatest of planners. And this is how we understand it.
Haj Khalil Mitchell, thank you for joining me on the show today. Well, I hope you've learnt a little bit about Islam and the faith and Haj's journey too. I think it's quite important to understand the journey someone goes on, especially when at a weren't born into the religion. So it was great to learn about the journey. It was great to learn about the views, and hopefully you've been educated a little bit about how the importance of the Muslim vote around the world has been, especially this year alone. And it sets its sights on being bigger with more years to come. Whether you are Muslim, whether you do follow Islam, or whether you don't, hopefully this episode has been informative for you. You've been watching UK Now on Quews News with me, Curtis Hinton.